My name is Paul Connett. I'm a retired professor of environmental chemistry from New York State. I've just written a book called The Case Against Fluoride. First of all, it's an extremely bad medical practice. Since 1945, it's the only time that we've used the public water supply to deliver medicine. We're not putting fluoride in the water to protect the water. We are putting fluoride in the water as a delivery system to get it to everybody. Now there's the problem. Once you put it into the water, you can't control the concentration. And you can't control who gets it. It goes to everyone. And there's no individual doctor's supervision. And most importantly, it's a violation of the individual's right to informed consent to medicine. When the community fluoridates, it's doing to everyone what a doctor can do to no one. You can't force a patient to take medicine. We have health authorities in Australia, which I believe are the most arrogant I've ever come across in the world, who will not debate the issue, will not answer my questions in writing, and yet they insist that they're going to force this practice on people willy-nilly. They've introduced mandatory fluoridation in Queensland, in Victoria it's mandatory, and in New South Wales, it's almost mandatory. It's very, very difficult for a community to resist fluoridation unless they have the strong support of their decision makers. Now, in addition to it being a bad medical practice, the evidence that it actually works is very poor. There's no difference in tooth decay between the countries which fluoridate and the countries which don't. And by the way, most of the countries in the world do not fluoridate their water. Only about 30 have some water fluoridation, and only 8 have more than 50% of their population's drinking water. Australia is one. The reason that they find it extremely difficult to demonstrate any kind of benefit is that the promoters have now admitted that it works topically, that fluoride works on the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. In South Australia, they could not demonstrate a statistically significant difference between kids who drank fluoridated water all their lives and kids who drank tank water. Even so, they advocated the addition of fluoride to bottled water. They have to explain that. I don't understand. Maybe it's because Colgate funds their research. Who knows? The major concern here is that there's now more and more evidence that water fluoridation, even at these low levels of 1 part per million, it is actually up to 250 times higher than mother's milk. In my view, that's not a sensible thing to do, and now the evidence is coming through to prove that. A condition called dental fluorosis, which is a mottling of the teeth, and this is caused by swallowing fluoride. So swallowing fluoride doesn't do much good to reduce tooth decay, but it does cause this condition called dental fluorosis. In addition to that, we are more concerned about the damage to the brain. In China, one study there showed a lowering of IQ at 1.9 parts per million. Well, we fluoridate at 1 part per million. You can't control how much water children drink. So some children in Australia, especially in the higher temperature areas, are going to be drinking far more water than those kids in China. So all said and done, there is no margin of safety between a dose which causes lowering of IQ in China and the doses that kids are going to get in Australia. Now, what parent in their right mind would countenance an attempt to reduce tooth decay by a very small amount, at the same time running the risk of possibly damaging their mental development? It's absolutely bizarre. But sadly, your health authorities here in Australia have never done health studies. They've been, after over 50 years, they say things like, well, we've been doing it for 50 years, but we don't see any problems. Well, that's nonsense. If you don't look, you don't find. The absence of studies does not mean the absence of harm. And even when you get these serious studies like the lowering of IQ, bone damage, arthritic-like symptoms, bone fractures, lowered thyroid functions, accumulation of pineal gland. These are some of the studies that have been produced around the world, and Australia is making absolutely no effort to reproduce those studies in Australia and confirm that it's safe in Australia. They're not doing that. There are people in Australia who absolutely have convinced themselves that when they're exposed to fluoride, they come down with a number of reversible symptoms like headaches and gastrointestinal problems, irritable bowel syndrome, rashes, a litany of things: tiredness not relieved by sleep, but pains in the joints. When they remove the source of the fluoride, when they stop drinking fluoridated water, these symptoms clear up. And when they drink the water again, these symptoms come back. Well, the Australian government just says, well, that's anecdotal. But they don't attempt to put it on a scientific level, and these people are allowed to sink or swim under their own devices. We've had time to look at all the literature, and when you read that literature, it's clear that fluoridation, its due date is over, it's past. This is an outdated practice. It should never have started, and it should now have stopped. It certainly should have stopped when the promoters accepted that it works topically. So the sooner that this practice is ended in Australia, the better. I urge the communities around here that are not yet fluoridated in New South Wales not to do so. And if you are fluoridated, the sensible thing to do is to put on everybody's water bill, the water is fluoridated. Do not use this water to make up baby formula. At the very least, that will protect them against the increased risk of dental fluorosis, but it might also protect them from far more serious things. It's a difficult one, this. A whole book has been written about how it started, and there it was a lot of industrial pressure on government to do this because they were producing a huge amount of fluoride in America. They were worried about liabilities, and they were able to change the image of fluoride as an air pollutant that had done more damage to agriculture than any other pollutant. So you change this nasty pollutant into a fuzzy, it's safe, you can put it in drinking water, kids can swallow it, etc. They can't. So that's one angle. A year before the US government endorsed fluoridation, the sugar lobby said we need to find a way to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. And they put a lot of money into schools of nutrition to promote the benefits of sugar and the use of fluoride to fight tooth decay. In addition to that, of course, the chemical they put in the drinking water is not pharmaceutical grade. It's not the same kind of fluoride that you put in your toothpaste. It's an industrial waste product. It comes from the scrubbing liquor of the phosphate fertilizer industry. For about 100 years, this phosphate industry in Europe and America was polluting the environment, damaging vegetation, and crippling cattle. And eventually they were required to put on a wet scrubber, spray of water, to capture two very toxic gases, hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride. The resulting solution is hexafluorosilicic acid, contaminated with a number of toxic metals like arsenic, lead, chromium, and even radioactive isotopes, because they mine the same ore that they mine for phosphate, they also mine for uranium. And this stuff you can't dump into the sea by international law, and you can't dump it locally because it's too concentrated. It would cost an arm and a leg to get rid of it as a hazardous waste, but if someone buys a hazardous waste from you, it becomes a product. So this is saving, in the United States at least, is saving the phosphate fertilizer industry a couple of $100 million a year. But personally, I don't think that's enough money to be the tail that wags the dog of the US Public Health Service, or the Department of Health and Human Services, as it's called today. I think it's more likely that what's driving this today is liabilities, particularly liabilities of all the dental manufacturers who've put fluoride in everything. And Colgate actually funds the research department at Adelaide University, which produces all the pro-fluoridation research articles. And also we've got the liabilities of the Australian Dental Association that's promoted this so fervently. And finally, we've got the problem for bureaucrats, politicians, health officials who have exaggerated this practice so much and have assured the public again and again and again it's safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. The notion that if you repeat something many times, eventually people will believe you if you've got a white coat on. And that's what they've been doing. And so for them, if they now admit that fluoridation was a bad idea, which they should, then it's going to be a huge hit on their credibility, on their reputation. And not many bureaucrats want to do that. It's going to take some strong political leadership above the bureaucrats to say, this is nonsense, stop it once and for all. And the good thing about fluoridation, unlike many other environmental issues, this is one that's as easy to stop as turning off a tap. If we had the political will, we could turn off the tap and fluoridation would be over just like that. And you can't do that to other things. I mean, you can't do that with ozone damage and the global warming and PCBs and all the other pollutants. But you can with this one. You can just turn it off if you have the political will. And to get the political will, we need people informed. Thanks, you will help here. We need people informed and we need people organized to get that political will, to put the pressure on the politicians. And at the very least, say to them, government has no right to force a medicine on me. I have the human right to choose what medicines I take. You can't force them on me.